Welcome to the Strategy Mob Podcast. Tune in for everything you need to know to stay in the know regarding the automotive industry. Here's your host, Jason Harris.
Hey, what's going on, Podcast Nation? It is Jason Harris here, and thank you for joining me on another episode of Strategy Mob. Today, I have a very cool guest. I'm excited to talk to him because I've been reading a couple of his articles, and we connected online recently, and he's just got, I think, some fun stuff to say. So we're going to have a good time today. I have the oh-so-famous Mr. David Allen Wood in the house today. David, what's going on?
Nothing much, sir. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I try to be energetic with these intros. I don't know. Sometimes it comes off like a little weird, but I'm just like, I feel like that's what people have to do when they do like podcast intros. They're like, yeah, let's bring the energy. I don't know why I do that. It's just, I guess it's fun. Hey, David, for everybody out there that's watching and listening right now, and is going to enjoy this amazing podcast that we're going to put together here. I figure what we'd do is to kick it off today is to start off with a little origin story. So, what is the origin story that is David Allen Wood?
Well, it's kind of a, I guess you could say, not your average trail into the car business, but I was born into it. My father was a dealer, and he started in, I guess, the late 70s selling cars. And by the time I was born, he was a fleet salesman and selling cars to rental places. And then he ended up buying his own store. He do hard work and everything. But either way, I was always around the store and started working for him probably before it was actually legal to be working. There's probably some lawsuits.
Yeah, that's usually how it is,
be
right?
filed against it. But hey, I was not the kid with the silver spoon. Most people know the dealer's kids as the privileged, and I was not privileged. But, I look back at it and it was fun. But I worked for him, and he sold in 2004, right after the 9/11 deal, and we got through that pretty good. I guess it was a small dealer, 60, 70 employees. Mm-hmm. After he sold, I worked for the people who bought it from him for a little bit and finally decided to get off into because we're just northeast of the Dallas DFW Metroplex area, about 40 miles, 50 miles. Mm-hmm. So I went off into the DFW area to do my own thing. I'd already worked around inside of a dealership, variable, fixed. But I kind of stayed in the fixed side. It's something I've always enjoyed is fixed operations. And of course, I've questions of why I like it. People are like, big money's all in finance, and blah, 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 and being this and doing that. It's like, man, it was always, to me, the challenge, the people coming in wanting to buy a car, they're wanting to buy that car. But people coming in are not wanting to fix a broke car. So It was just, it was the challenge of the, overcoming objectives. To me, it was a lot more, relationship building, I guess you can say. And that's really what I've enjoyed about the business. But I did this pretty much all through the, late 90s, started in the early 90s all the way to the 2000s and then up to about a couple of years ago. And been doing consulting, worked for a couple of consulting companies, did contract work for a couple of the manufacturers. Didn't really, I liked it. I enjoyed it. I just really enjoyed more along the lines of mentoring and helping others, managers, directors, dealers, just kind of scope out of, what's going on in the industry. And, everybody talks about change. Everybody talks about evolution. And I just, I really had a niche for talking to people because everything I did when I was in the dealership was, it drew a lot of attention to like area dealers all the way up to the manufacturing levels of, this guy. And it really, at the end of the day, it wasn't this guy. It was me building great teams to do great things. And I had a few dealers that really allowed me, they took the reins off the pony and let me run. They didn't sit there and, put the bridle in too hard and, drive me into staying in one lane, which, sometimes can be dangerous. You let somebody out of the lane too much. Next thing you know, you're having to talk about expenses. But
You gotta love those conversations.
I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, I enjoyed the car business. It's always been a passion of mine. Still to this day, you know, a lot of my clients that I do have are automotive related. I've been stepping outside of that, helping everybody, because, you know, anything you do, anything in the car business, you really think about it, can correlate or run parallel to any other business.
Oh,
you know,
100%.
Unless you're like, you know, building, you know, satellites going into space or something. But it's one way or another, you're servicing them. It's just a different deal.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, you have the different departments. I mean, those are 4 or 5 different businesses being run in a dealership simultaneously. Team development, customer service, after sales, before sales. I mean, literally every lesson that you learn, and I'm the same way. I mean, this industry has just gifted me with so many opportunities to learn so much, and so many of the lessons I've learned, you know, reach way outside of our automotive industry and is totally relevant to so many other places. You know, you touched on something earlier about team, and you know, I've been having a lot of conversations lately about technology, right? Because, you know, in our business, it's just such a hot topic, right? Tech, data, which, don't get me wrong, it needs, the conversation has to be there, and it is super important. But I just find like sometimes we get to the point where we talk so much about the technology, we talk so much about the strategy, we actually forget that it's the team that really ultimately ends up executing all of this. And you know what? I've had the privilege of working for some really great dealerships and a privilege of owning a great dealership, but I've also had the privilege of working at some really bad dealerships, and I've got to see, yeah, you too, right? Dave, you've seen that too. Oh, yeah. I've seen the extreme. I've seen the extreme, both sides, right? The really good and the really bad, and I've learned equally, I think, from both. But I've seen all the dealerships I've had the opportunity to really kind of work with, and I've been able to consult and work and sit down and talk and strategize with hundreds and hundreds of dealerships over my career. The one thing that I find is consistent in some of the most successful dealerships I work with is their team, but the glue that holds their team is really the mindset. And I feel like this is such a great time for us to kind of talk about this, because we were jamming about this a little bit before we jumped on and started recording. Is, you know, we're going into the 4th quarter of the year. Winter's coming. No pun off of a Game of Thrones or anything. But, you know, but to top it off, not only winter's coming, but it's winter coming in the middle of a pandemic. And, you know, it's like, it's one thing to talk about consumer confidence. It's like, how do we keep our team consistently motivated? And you got some great thoughts on this. So, you know, what are some of the pointers or, you know, advice you could give to people out there that to keep that team motivated through, you know, through this time and this next quarter?
I think the majority of motivation is how the leader responds to what's going on around them. If somebody's buying into everything that's going on right now, especially right now in the States, with everything, the political polarization that's going on and the pandemic and winter coming on. I mean, it's just, you think, you know, if you're in your head, you're like, oh man, this is horrible. Well, if you think it's horrible, then guess what? It's going to be horrible. So your whole point is to not really focus on that. And you have to keep your team's mindset. You know, you have to give just, I mean, what I always did when things like, you know, every October, everybody's talking about October is a horrible month in the car business because it's state fair. And you're sitting there going, really? Come on, the state fair? There's not that many people out there going to buy, you know, whatever candy bar they're frying this month, or, you know. But it's you got to take their mind off of that, and the mindset all goes down to how you are reacting, how you're communicating with your team. And always, everything has to be optimistic, you know, and I hate, you know, I've said this a million times, and I've had team members come back at me and just sit there and say, well, you know what, you know, David, I'm not optimistic. I'm realistic. I'm like, you know, realistic these days is almost close to pessimistic, because realistic is an opinion. That is only an opinion by itself. Yes, this is data. This has happened. I understand. This is what's going on around us. But if we succumb to this and you're calling this realistic, then we've just jumped on the tracks down the road. So we have to think above everything that's going on. When people walk in, you don't, you know, you have to I mean, whatever department you're in sales, you're in, service, finance. If you're a guy picking up the phone in the dealership and parts, you have to sit there and give off the vibe and feel that, nothing is going on around us. And people are like, well, that's lying to people. No, it's not. It's changing the atmosphere of what you would rather it to be. And if you want it to be negative, it's going to be negative. If you're worried about everything that's going on, then it's slowly going to come out in the business end of it. But
you know what, David, I feel like, you're 100% right. Like we have to stay optimistic, and we have, and it's no different than us telling people that we need to lead by example. And for us, that's really what it is. We're talking about, so you have to, I can listen to this podcast, I can watch this video, and I can shake my head up and down with us and go, yeah, you're right. You're 100% right. And I can walk back into my dealership tomorrow, and I'll be optimistic. And, I could probably even do it for a few days, right?
And everything starts paying.
Exactly. So you can see where my next question is. It's like, how do we maintain that routine, the consistency of the routine of staying optimistic?
To me, I think everybody's different. It's finding your niche of how you keep your mindset. Me, I found mine to be, I read a lot. I read a whole lot of stuff, but
that's a great one. I like that too.
But I also, some people pray. I'm spiritual. I pray. I meditate, but at the same time, I focus myself on, because I'm that guy. What you just explained, I'm human. I'm going to do it. I go in. I think, this is. Let's take an example. A variable. Example like finance. We're really focusing in on really, our penetration on, say, this extended warranty that we really need to do, and this and that, and the profitability on it is a lot better. And, say 3 days goes by and it's just, no, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. No, I don't want that. Well, I mean, most of these guys that are sitting in the box, they know it. They've been on the floor, so they know what no means. You're going to get told no a million times, but a lot of them let that get them. And next thing you know, when they're sitting in a meeting, the Monday or the Tuesday, whatever day of the week you have the meeting, but at that meeting, most of them do have them every day. Well, hey, what's going on with this? What's going on with that? And you're going to say, oh, nobody wants it. No, yeah, I can't push that. I can't push, that it's not there. The money's not right on the package, or you know as well as what I'm talking about. There's going to be a million excuses, but you've already given into that. So
no, you're 100% right. Like it's so easy to create the excuses. So it's super important, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, is you have to, like, staying optimistic is like working out, right? Like there's a reason why we work out in the morning. I mean, I know there are people out there that like to work out at night and stuff like that, but I think for the most of us, and I need to do more of it, but it's like we work out in the morning because it sets the stage for our day, right? Like when I work out in the morning, like I feel it, I feel better. I haven't eaten when I've done it, so I'm just like, now I'm ready. I can grab that healthy meal, and I feel a little more balanced throughout the day, and it's that morning routine, both physically getting ready and then mentally getting ready. But we don't talk enough about that morning mental routine to stay optimistic, because I'm with you. I did the same thing. I had to find something that would ground me daily, so that by the time I got to the dealership, like I'm like my tank of optimism was filled up again, so I can run through the rest of the day knowing it's going to deflate itself, because it will. We're human, right? You said it, right? We're human. It's going to deflate, but then the next morning I had to fill that back up, so I'm curious, like, what does that look like for you? What's that daily kind of optimism refill look like for you?
Well, that's where I have to sit there and I have to meditate about it. The times that I've driven and commuted several miles to work, it was obviously a good time to do that. And let's not talk about it. Yes, I was driving an automobile, so it might have been dangerous, but I never had a wreck. Knock on wood myself. But anyways, mine was always really focusing on, a lot of things that I did. I always did the Eisenhower, quadrant I would do it, write it down. And plus I've got a photographic memory. So I always consistently see what's ever in my quadrant and what I needed to, what's to do right now and this and that. But at the same time, what needs to keep me motivated to do this job and do it to the best of my abilities? Well, one, I was bred to do this. I was basically whipped into doing the
yeah, you were born into it. You had no option.
But it goes back to, there's something that made him do it, and it's not about failing or being a loser or anything like that. It's just about doing the right thing. And when I would get into, say, 3 or 4 day slump, and it's like, man, and especially in fixed ops, man, you walk in there and you've got this big plan and everything's going well for 2 or 3 days. This new process you put in place, and then wrench gets thrown in it, and it's going to happen. It's going to happen 100% of the time. There's no such thing as a perfect process that happens overnight that you implement that just goes over as smooth as baby oil over skin. It just don't happen. So you sit there and you're like, oh man, and you're thinking on the fly and you're doing this and you're losing track on this, and next thing you know, you're overwhelmed again, and you're getting back to that inside, that pessimistic part of you. Oh man, I'm not going to be able to hit this projection, or hit this number that I need to hit, or get to this CSI score, or do this. I've gotten popped too many times because this or that. But I mean, there's so many different things, but you have to stop. You have to put yourself, I am the owner of this company. You're not. You're just the service director, the finance director, the sales director.
You are and you aren't, right? Like, I always do try to motivate people. Like, I look at leadership like a barbershop.
Exactly.
Like, you're renting the chair, all right?
That's exactly
what you do with that chair is entirely up to you. Yes, a percentage of that gross profit is going to the house to cover expenses, but at the end of the day, it's you control your paycheck, right? There was something you mentioned, and I just want to really harp on a little bit is, as a manager, you kind of built with it or not. And I actually agree with you on this, right? Like, I mean, I'm thinking of some of the best managers, some of the worst managers I ever worked with, but some of the best managers that I've ever worked with, or had the privilege of meeting or talking with or consulting with, is that they just kind of had this, I think this natural ability to take their own optimism and to share with others, just kind of like gift it on to another person.
Yes.
And I realized that, I myself wasn't natural that way. Like, I can get myself optimistic and pumped, but then having to go to work and then having to get the rest of my 12 other team members to get excited about the day, I was just like, oh God, I just got mine. Okay, let me own mine, right? And I feel like a lot of managers are that way. So like, I actually had to figure out a way to process, all right, my sharing of my optimism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And every single salesperson was slightly different. So it was like either, sitting down having a coffee with them may have been enough, right? Just my time may have been enough. Publicly announcing their wins and showing them appreciation, that was enough. The pat on the back was enough. But every single one was enough. But I knew as a good manager, and all the good managers I ever felt is that I've ever seen or have ever dealt with, is that they don't just fill up their own tank. They take that tank and they're going to help others to fill up theirs as well. I'm sure you've seen some amazing examples of this. Can you think of any off the top of your head that was just like people just crushed at this?
I've had when you say crush, you mean as in a positive way?
Yeah, they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I've had a few good, I guess you can say, dealer operators, general managers, managing partners. Only a couple, and I've been at a few dealerships, but I've really they're the ones who lended the most and developed me. And it's been some years back, but because my father, I'll tell you right now, he was a worry wart. He was the biggest pessimist I've ever, met in my life. And it's just, oh man, I don't want to get on that. But anyways, but no, I mean, it's exactly what you're talking about. They'd been in the business so long, and I wouldn't say, I want to say they're born for this, but their intellect towards being around people and understanding. People say not everybody's motivated by money, and then somebody will tell you that's ridiculous. They are. Everybody's motivated by money. That's there's a balance to that, and that's what I taught. And there's one in particular guy that taught me balance. And when I say balance, it's how you treat people, it's how you listen to people, it's how you relate to people, interact with them, everything. There's a balance. You have, say, 18 technicians in your shop. There's 18 individual people that totally think on a different level. They're not just a bunch of dumb technicians. You have 20 people on your sales floor. You have 20 individual, personalities that somebody relates to something differently. And you have to find that balance between everybody to where you can relate to each person on their own level, but at the same time, when you're making a decision as a whole, it's balanced amongst the group. And I thought it was the most complex and convoluted thing I'd ever heard in my life. And I worked for this individual for quite a while, and it really started making sense. And it took me 2 years to figure out the science to what he was doing. And I wouldn't even say it as a science. This guy, he was just an old car guy. I say an old car guy. Most people think of that with some guy with a cigarette hanging out of their mouth, talking like this. Go get the lock stretcher and all this stuff. But no, he wasn't anything like that. And it's like I would be having a bad day. I was in my mid to late 20s. It was right after it was a few years after my dad had sold and I left out and to do my own thing and make my own name in the business. But I would have my negative days, and he could see it. He could feel the energy coming off of me. And his way of getting through to me was telling me a dumb joke that obviously he knew I did not think was funny. And I would just look at him. But it took me out of my shell. And right when he would hit me with that, then he would start talking about something business related after he did his little dad joke and his chuckle. And but then we'd start talking, and he got me enthused, something about, what we were talking about in the meeting. And he would bring me back into, me instead of, oh man, I'm not going to hit this. I'm not going to hit that.
He connected with you as an individual. He connected.
But he could do that with anybody and everybody. And at first I thought it was just, this guy's a con artist. This guy, he must be digging through people's personal files. He's stalking their social media accounts, something, and just knows everything. But no, this guy wasn't even up to this day. He's not even on social media. If he was on LinkedIn, he could kill it. He'd crush it on LinkedIn. Just how his leadership abilities. But he was a really good mentor, and to take the optimism and how to address it with other people, and get other people to, like you're saying, pass that along, pass that torch. Say it's like a candle. You got one burning candle and a bunch of burnout candles. How do you light the rest of those candles? It's basically asking that question, and it's not as easy as I'll just tilt it over and light that wick. No, it's not like that.
No, not at all. You really have to get to know the individual.
It really is, and right? Within the reason of the expense of the business, but most people, there's a and I'm not going to go into the generational breakdown here because people get offended. Now, there's some truth to it. There is some science, but there are people that need attaboys. There are people that need the good job and this and that. And there's some people that don't care. So they say. But when you give them that recognition, even though they don't, respond to it or anything, or show you any kind of feedback that they really appreciated you giving them the feedback you did, or, calling them in, taking them out to dinner one night, just them and their wives, or them and their husbands, and, something like that. They act like, okay, and they do it, and it's no big deal. And that really sinks into people. And when I'm not saying you go to do that stuff and you start talking about work, but there's things
it has to be authentic.
It really does.
See, that's the kicker. It's like what we're talking about here. If you're trying to improve another's optimism or mindset, like, you need to come at it not selfishly. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't come at it going like, I need you to be optimistic right now, because if you're optimistic, you're going to sell me more cars. Like, you can't take that approach. Like, you have to come authentically and genuine and say, look, I want you to be optimistic, but I want you to be optimistic not because you're going to sell more cars if you do it. It's because I want you to be the best you could possibly be. And, you know, when you come off that way, boy, do people open up, and you're able to connect with them so much faster. I can guarantee that that manager that you were talking about did exactly that, either knowingly or unknowingly, did it really, really well.
Well, I'll tell you what helped me, and this is what really it kills me for people to find out outside of the automotive industry that your average manager or director of a department, dealership, whatever, you better have some psychology skills. Because
I 100% agree with you on that one.
Luckily, my wife, my current wife, is we've been married almost 10 years and love her to death, but she's a psychology major, and she has taught me so much about people. I mean, and it probably significantly helped me out. The books she turned me on to, the philosophies, the ideologies of, you know, just looking at people, you know, studying micro expressions on people's faces. But that, we can go down a rabbit hole with that. But either way, it's the average manager in a car dealership. If you're not in tune with yourself and you're not in tune with humans as a you know, a functioning being, and all the different emotions that are inside of somebody, the different things that happen to people, if you're oblivious to that, you're not going to be a good manager. I don't care how much numbers you can put up. You're not going to be a good leader, because at the end of the day, you know, you've heard a million times of people, I'm not in the car business, I'm in the people business. Yeah, I loved those guys telling me that. But anyways, they weren't very good people either. But you have, if you can relate to your team and you can build a team that coexists like one functioning operating unit like it should, and it happens, it can happen to anybody. It's just, it takes time and it takes work. It takes a lot of work.
Well,
but
I think that's the key takeaway here, is that, you know, I think there's a fair amount of people that are watching, listening, and agreeing with us. But we have to understand it's almost kind of going back to what we kind of first said in the beginning, where I said this is kind of like a workout, right?
Yep.
Like losing the 20 pounds, like, you know what you got to do. Doesn't make it easier. Right?
And when you might do it for 2 days, but you got to keep on doing it every day. And when you stop, guess what's going to happen? It's going to come back. So,
and I think it's so important right now for managers out there to really try to connect with their teams, because there's just so much going on in the world. To your point you talked earlier, is you got the pandemic, you got the political climate. I mean, you just there, and that, look, I love that people say, well, that doesn't affect me. I'm like, I just call BS, you know, because it does, you know, either knowingly or unknowingly, it's going to affect you in some way. And if it doesn't affect you, it's sure in the hell going to affect some of your customers, you know. And it's consumer confident. I think right now, depending on where you are in the world, can be at an all-time low. And, you know, your employee confidence also can be the exact same way. And you know what? Here's the one thing that I've seen with all the most successful dealerships I've ever visited and had a chance to work with. Happy employees make for happy, confident customers. But the employee needs to be happy and confident first. Like, you know, that sounds weird. I'm always saying, like, you got to put the customer first. You got to put the customer at the center of everything. Well, that's true. But if your team is not confident, then you got to step back for a moment. You got to put your team first before your customers. Thoughts on that?
100% every time. If you lift your team up and you treat them as, you know, well, like they need to be treated, you know, and I'm not going to go out and just say, you know, you compensate them at the top, but if you care for your team as much as you think about that bottom line, you're not even going to have to ever worry about a bottom line. You know, it's just going to grow and grow and grow, because everybody is using that, you know, that method of, you know, backing their way into a profit, saving their way to a profit. At the end of the day, you're in a business. You have to invest in your business, and your biggest investment needs to be your people. Bottom line.
And you know what? I think this, you know, I hate to call out silver linings during this pandemic. But I actually think that there is a little bit of a silver lining there. And I think you've probably seen this, and I've seen this too, is that you really got to see over the last 5 months or so, or 6 months or so, who are the really good operators and who aren't.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I talked to a lot of staff that were furloughed or laid off, you know, during whatever state, you know, or province, you know, closure that they had. And I found out that some of them had continuous communications with their owners and their leaders. And then I had some that, like, I haven't heard from my dealership in 4.5 months. And I'm just like, what the hell kind of leader is like we laid you off and you haven't heard anything from them in 4.5 months? It's crazy. But, you know, I there was kind of going into my next subject. It's that confidence. We were kind of talking about that earlier. And it's like, it's not just the confidence in our staff, but it's confidence in our consumers as well. This is a different time for consumers and for salespeople. It's a different time to buy a car, let alone sell a car. In fact, speaking of buying a car, you wrote an article recently where you actually talked about buying a car during the pandemic. And I think you had some really interesting perspective that I think could help just kind of the overall conversation that we're having now, and just really kind of drive home the importance of keeping yourself and your team optimistic. Kind of walk me through, you know, what happened and how to go down.
Well, I mean, obviously during a pandemic where you're going to have some issues. What did we see around the, you know, especially the U.S. And I mean, obviously it's a global pandemic.
Mm-hmm,
it's not just the China virus or whatever in the U.S. But I mean, there's a lot of people that just, they went without jobs. They were compensated through the government, but there was obviously issues. There are a lot of lenders were being very generous on extensions and stuff like that. I've talked to a lot of friends that were going through problems. They called me up, and back when it first started, I want to say it's really weird because it seems like the country shut down on my birthday around the 1st of March. And I was just like, what did I do wrong? But, so I had some friends, I would say, called me up about April, May, June, and they, you know, they'd gotten extensions on their vehicles. And they're, you know, a lot of my friends and where I'm from and part of country in Texas I'm from, there are a lot of oil people. I say oil workers, they work out on the oil wells and barracks and stuff like that in the Oklahoma area, out in West Texas. And these guys make a lot of money, but they work a lot. They're like, you know, 4 weeks on, 2 off, 4 weeks on. Well, they no longer are out there making that, and they're getting, you know, not as much money from the government for the furlough money, and they're getting a small furlough money from the oil companies, which is very a fraction of their deal. So I'm not just putting this about me, but this is coming from other people I've known about.
No, the story is very similar to a lot of people's stories right now.
Yeah, and well, they're calling me. It's like, Dave, what do I do? You're in the car business and blah, 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 and this is what's happened. And these old guys are just like car guys. I mean, there's every dealership I've worked at, they're just like, you know, you have these car guys who go, you have a salesman who's 3-4 months in the business and, you know, finally starting to make, you know, £9, $10,000 a month, something like that, you know, and they're like, they go and buy the biggest, baddest thing they can get, you know.
Oh yeah, it happens.
It's car guy disease. I mean, I've done it, you know, and my buddies in the oil business, they got these big diesel trucks, you know, $80,000, $90,000 diesel trucks decked out with everything you can put on them, and now they're not making that money. Well, we need to get out of our truck, you know, and I was needing to get out of my vehicles, and it's just not good. I mean, first of all, the depreciation, and we were kind of talking about, you know, how hot cars are right now, but at the same time, the depreciated value of what, you know, we had was so significant. No lender is going to touch you unless you're putting pretty much, you know, 70% of your negative equity down, and that's just that's crazy. And you know, like me personally, I'm sitting there looking at vehicles that I bought because and what I've done is I've mostly had demos, and then when I would leave a dealership, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a demo lined up yet, and I would just buy the vehicle I had, and that's typically what I did. And that's how I kind of ended up with some vehicles. So either way, when I went in to try to trade my vehicles, it's like, they're telling me, oh yeah, your credit's not that great. Well, I know this. I understand this. People are like, oh, you're talking about your credit in public. It's like, I'm vulnerable. I don't care. It is what it is.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It's a real thing. I mean, it's a $1 billion industry of people having bad credit, and there's people on the other end making money off of it. And either way, I go into these dealerships and I'm saying, are you telling me a lender can see that I have this much money tied up in vehicles per month, and I'm trying to get rid of them, and now I'm only wanting to buy this, so I'm taking it down. So not putting a real number out there. I almost had $3,000 worth a month worth of just 2 vehicles and payments. And I mean, they were very expensive vehicles, but I'm looking at something where you're replacing that with maybe $700-800 a month in payments.
Sure, which I think a lot of people out there are thinking the same.
That's cutting it less. I mean, that's huge. But lenders like, oh no, man, that's just and it's like I start talking to it's the car business. Everybody, and I even talked to friends I had at the banks, that were like, regional presidents of some of these big auto lenders, and they're like, oh man, we can't get the underwriters to really budge on anything right now, and this and that. And I was like, just tell me the truth. Y'all are in a bubble right now, are you not? And one of them kind of choked up, and he said yes. Not choked up like cried, but just told me the truth and said yes. He goes, to be honest with you, we started reserving this much back in March just to offset everything that we're probably going to lose come when we're allowed to repossess cars again. Because right now, there's a lot of lenders.
You know what? That's totally true, right? I mean, really, look, the reality is we were only still dealing with the social economics of this. We actually haven't dealt with the actual economics of it. We've insulated ourselves into a bubble. And there's this kind of false sense of security. But, both of us have been in the automotive business long enough to understand that, when you live and die on commission, right? Like you got your ups and downs, right? And we're heading towards a down for sure. Sorry, go ahead, continue.
And I see that, but I mean, that's what he said. He basically said, we've floated all this money, and there's people out there, and it comes, I feel, and he feels, it comes down to people living beyond their means. I mean, when I had those $3,000 cars, when I was at a car dealership, making, almost $200,000 a year, that's $3,000 a month. It was still ridiculous, but it was easier to swallow. And I was that typical car guy. I was going to drive whatever brand I pretty much represented. I had to. And I've consulted at dealerships where I walk into a Subaru dealership, and the sales director and the fixed ops directors, they're all driving an older model GM or Ford or an older Beamer or something like that. And it's like, I always thought that was tasteless because, if they have demos, they obviously drive. But there's a lot of dealers that don't do demos. So it just depends on where you go. But I was always that guy. I had to drive what I was doing, because if somebody came to me with a problem or an issue or a situation or confronted me, say if I was working for a Fiat dealership, and I never have, but I would want to know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a Fiat. I don't like not knowing what I'm doing.
Well, you know what? I think there's a lot of salespeople out there that are dealing with customers that have very, very similar stories to what you're going through right now. And I think as an industry, I don't think we're necessarily preparing our salespeople to handle these types of situations. And so I'm curious, for someone who actually went through it yourself, I mean, you clearly don't feel like you got handled well, going through this. What advice would you give, a salesperson out there or a manager out there that's listening to this and going, man, I got a customer right now with pretty much the exact same story, and I'm just not 100% sure how to handle it. What kind of advice would you give that person?
First of all, you have to train your salesperson. It's beyond word track. It's you have to train your salesperson to understand the situation of what's going on, and they have to know how finance works, because most salespeople, they're like, oh man, that dude, that dude's a credit bandit. He can't buy anything. And they're genuinely nice to you, but they really don't explain anything besides they can't get anything done. And, to me, a lot of that comes along the lines of having, a TO from a finance person. There's a lot of people who would rather hear from the person that's dealing directly with the banks, which these days it depends on dealer to dealer, because sometimes it's a sales manager's keying up the whole deal in the tower and communicating with the bank, and he's just sending, he's sending the packet back to the producer, the director, or whatever. But as a salesperson, you have to have empathy for what's going on and understand. And are you getting the deal structured correctly? Because I've seen some magical things happen inside of a car dealership through traditional lending with credit scores that, would just blow your mind like blow.
No, I hear you.
And if it makes sense and the deal is structured right, and that's what one thing salespeople have to know. Are we structuring the deal right? And with the constant turn of salespeople, you might have that one good salesperson that's like that. But, I can go into another subject here and branch off really far, but that's usually where that one person that really gets it, really good at explaining this, he becomes a sales manager in the next 2 months. And then 4 months later, he's running a dealership. Well, and there we go. But that's the end of that story. But that's generally how that goes. But you have to consistently train everybody every day about what's going on, what you're going to have coming into your showroom. And when I say that, what credit situations, what financial situations.
David, you're so right. I mean, it's we don't spend enough time training our managers on how to engage with their own staff.
Nope.
And we're not spending enough time. Look, the game's changed. I mean, look, our customers are coming in with concerns that, well, frankly, they've never had these concerns before. And, but I think you're 100% right. I think for a dealership to be prepared, to handle, I don't want to use the word handle because it sounds negative, like you own control, but to be, empathetic and compassionate and be able to actually sit down and work side by side with the customer that's had a similar situation like you have. I mean, you got to train it. Like, this is not just like, here's a word script. Because our industry, we love our scripts. So we'll just give them a script. That's what we'll do. We'll just give them a script, and then that's if they run into the situation, they default back to the script. But no, you were mentioning kind of earlier. I mean, it's like to be empathetic, to connect with someone, you really got to understand how to do that, because it for some people it's very natural, and for other people that it's not. Look, David, I know we're getting towards the tail end of our time, today, and this is definitely a topic and a subject I'm really passionate about, and you are too. We probably go on for another hour if we have, but before we do that though, look, anybody out there watching and listening, you need to connect with David. I love his articles. He's got some great, his perspective is just absolutely amazing. You got to check him out. But David, for anybody out there that's watching and listening right now and would love to connect with you and just kind of follow along, with your journey, what's the best way to do so?
Connecting with me on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to connect with me. I'm usually on there every day. It's typically a lot of my peers are on there, so I'm constantly relating to them. But LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect up with me. Drop me a line on LinkedIn, a DM, and go from there.
That's perfect. And just so you guys know, it's David Allen Wood. Right,
yes.
Don't put David Wood in there. I did it a couple times. It doesn't come up.
Use David Allen Wood. And actually, I think it's www.linkedin.com/David Allen Wood.
I think it is too. Hey, David, thank you so much for taking the time to jam with me today. This has been a blast. You have yourself an amazing day.
You too, Jason. Have a good one, sir.
Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to the Strategy Mob Podcast with your host, Jason Harris. Don't want to miss new content? Be sure to sign up to be a mobster at strategymob.com to stay in the know. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe.